If both of us are sitting on 3 different boards, we kind of second guess each other. On the 4th board when we go, we don't even do our homework, because if Menaka has seen it or Pallavi has seen it, I'm okay with it. And it's creating its own set of ripple effect on boards. At one point in time, we had the old boys network. Now I think we should just call it as old directors network. People sitting on multiple boards and creating echo chambers. So all these are also part of what should be an equitable boardroom. And I want to speak about where we have made a lot of progress in the Indian corporate world. 17.6% of boards in the Nifty 500 companies are women. But I'm kind of embarrassed. When are we going to get to 50%? What stops the government, SEBI, to say, come 2027, the top 500 listed entities should have 50% women? And the usual pushback from male are, the filter is very low at the top, we don't have enough women. I mean, the usual excuses and pretexts. So I want to talk about all of those. We are not bringing conversations about, I think, work experience today in the conversation of boardrooms. We should speak about it. And also I want to speak about the most controversial one that we are facing, the startups culture. India is suddenly booming into be a startup nation, and we will have mishaps and crises to start off with. If you compare it to the proportion of corporate India and the mishaps it has had over the last 75 years, this is nothing. It's so what are those learnings when we bring context to the overall equitableness? So what we will do is we'll go around each of you for your views and come back to some questions I have. But before that, I want to do another kind of equitableness for this particular conference. I noticed that typically people who are speaking on the stage get all the attention. But I want to call upon the unsung sheroes and heroes here. I think all of those at the back end producing this conference, I think deserve a huge round of applause. Amount of logistics that has happened to, again, make all of us look nice. So thank you, everybody there. I think thank you for making this. So with this, Pallavi, I want to go back to you for your observations.
Yeah. I think boards of companies have come a long way. Exactly a decade ago, SEBI introduced, the Companies Act was amended, SEBI introduced minimum of 1 director on the board. That 1 director is still minimum of 1 director, and very few companies have more than 2 women on the board. I've been on boards where there are more than 2 women, and I can tell you the discussion is far better than having just 1 woman. But 1 woman can also change the narrative and be very different. So from the usual homogenized sort of approvals that men look for, somebody is on the board and asking 1,000 questions. It starts initially by saying, oh my God, now I'm an independent director. I have obligations, duties under law, so I have to perform. But once you start digging a little deeper and deeper into what companies do, some of these questions will start coming naturally to you. And I think you've been on 1 board. When you come on a 2nd board, it's much better. And I think age is a challenge, both young age and old age. And I'm happy at a certain age, people are expected to retire from boards. I'm pretty happy with that. They can be around in the company in various capacities, and they're better used there. I think where it's a challenge is when people are younger, in their late 30s and early 40s, when they're ready to be on boards because they have the experience, they have ideas, they have the ambitions, but they're considered to be too young. So when I get asked, will you be on the board? And I said, no, I'm on enough boards, I don't want to be, but let me suggest a younger person. Oh, but no experience. I said, how will she get an experience if nobody wants to take a young person on the board? So it's like a chicken and egg. But it's time now for the younger generation. You can have CEOs who are 38, 39, but why not women on boards who are at the same age? They're as qualified and as good. So I think time has come when younger women come on the board, not just wait for elders like us.
Thank you, Pallavi. Menaka, going to you for your observations.
No, I agree with everything that Mr. Shroff has just said. Look, the average age of the average Indian today is, I think, 27, 28. This is who the average Indian is. So that is a far changed conception of what it means to be Indian, as opposed to who is a decision maker in India. So I completely take on board your point that boards not only need to have younger people in more numbers, but I also think that boards need to have younger people for just sheerly that different worldview, which is India today. And that is what is dramatically different about a country like India from, say, old Europe or America, because you have this demographic advantage. And you have to be able to understand that demographic advantage by having younger people on it, who also have that kind of skill set of seeing how, the modern corporate unit exists. And what are those markets? What is, as lawyers, well, what can you imagine for regulations to be for this new market? Because if this young Indian is the consumer, then that market looks entirely different from a market standpoint of a consumer being 55 years old. So, for just so many reasons, of course, there is that wonderful moral reason for equality, right? And we call it the Constitution of India, which actually speaks to these conceptions of India being a more equal society, a more diverse society, a society with more dignity, but also a society with a different rational sensibility, which we're supposed to adopt post-1950. So there are many good reasons to have a diverse boardroom.
Sure. So coming to you, Ritu, I mean, you sit on boards, you've been an entrepreneur your life, and you've seen also the boardroom composition and the average age change. And picking on what Pallavi spoke about, the concept of retirement. I mean, one would wonder for a population of India, what is the right retirement? And I always call it the Markandeya syndrome. None of us feel that we should retire. Somebody else should retire. So how do you bring that concept in the boardroom?
Okay, good to be here. I hope after those exciting sessions before us, people are ready for something of this sort. But anyway, I'll speak more from my personal experience. I've spent most of my youth I founded a company when I was very young and scaled it up into almost $1 billion business. And recently I stepped down from my executive role to focus more on governance. I feel I can extend that particular, whatever skill sets I've developed in new boards. But the most important lesson I've realized in that journey, and because you're talking about equitable boards, besides gender, which is the obvious one where there is a bias, I think there is a bias today even on age. There is a huge, somewhere an association with gray hairs and your ability to perform I also have gray hairs, I just hide them better than others. But there is a correlation between age and your ability to perform on the board, so which is typically a binding constraint for. Equitable also means to me is that in terms of skill sets that you bring to the table, in terms of backgrounds, in terms of being able to contribute to a board without having connections, right? Just the fact that you're able to bring your skill to the table as the biggest weapon than anything else. I think we have a long way to go in India where we can sense those kind of equitability, because I personally have witnessed those challenges. But I've seen that the new age organizations, startups, which are themselves founded by youngsters, are much more open, honestly, on this aspect. So I'm seeing that there is an intent to get in people gender agnostic. I mean, people have to at some point leave gender behind when they enter the boardroom and have a conversation which is based on just the skill and the contribution. That's one. I also see that there is a bias towards certain functions. You're seeing boards are increasingly, people from legal background, people who come from financial backgrounds are a default choice to be on board. But I think there is a great imperative, because we are talking about equitable, get people who comes with background in technology, Why can't they get a place in the board? People who understands human capital better, why can't they get a place in the board? Because going forward for sustainability of organization, this is going to be an extremely important point. So I think the conversations on board equitability is vast, the scope. I'm not going to cloud all the conversations because I completely agree with whatever has already been said. So there's nothing more that I can add to that.
Yeah. So I want to come to Pallavi on that.
Yeah. Can I add something to what she said? While I agree that women coming on the board because of who they are themselves and not because of some other connection somewhere, I think there is a slight change that I see. Because of the nomination and remuneration committees, and they have the obligation to find directors, I have seen in certain companies, maybe the larger ones now, they will hire an Egon Zehnder or somebody to go and find women directors. And that I'm starting to see that change. Very little, and women have come on board for who they are, not because somebody has recommended them. We need a lot more of that. Which means then this whole golden skirt circuit that I have only 500, 300 women and there are 1,000 boards and these same women have to rotate in all the boards will not happen. Because there are so many talented women out there who can then be taken on boards for their own talent.
Sure. So I want to ask you this question. Are we done, is India Inc. done with buying reputation? Because when you look at buying reputation, it's the same set of 200, 250 names which keep floating around. It's as if, and everybody will talk about there is no funnel. So I phrase it as buying reputation because I know you will probably not because you will ask the tough question, because if I have you on my board, the markets give me 2% extra premium, my investors give me less grief. So I'm buying reputation versus governance is about being accountable to people who are not related to business otherwise.
This probably started when suddenly you had to put women on board. So instead of just keeping family on board, just to tick mark, they started looking out for independent women. We all started because there was a need for independent women on boards. But I think this buying that reputation still exists. They want only this set of 200 women who can, but I think that cannot last long. As more and more companies want to change governance and voluntarily do better, they will need women on boards. Can you hear 50% of the population is women, but you have to struggle to put one woman on the board? So many educated, you have MBAs, lawyers, chartered accountants, people in management, but no, they don't want to go to those because they're unknown. Give them a chance. They're very, very good.
So Menaka, picking on that, do you think quota system for diversity on boards for a limited period, say 15, 20 years of Indian evolution, will it really help?
Yeah, I mean, there are some European countries who actually use this kind of regulatory regime where either you have X percentage of women or you just pay a fine, and it's a substantial fine. Look, I mean, I personally feel, and I see this in the court system, and Mrs. Shroff will agree with me on this, the Indian court system for the longest time was the greatest old boys club. And it is dramatically changing, dramatically. I mean, I am proof of that, So, and the wonderful thing about the court system and litigation is there isn't a quota as litigators. You just need to be able to attract that work, and of course, that's the challenge. And then, your reputation and your quality will see you through. So I'm not big on more quotas, you see, because with the amendment to the Companies Act, which necessitated at least one woman director, now you have 720 NSE companies that have one woman director on them. And there are a handful of highly successful, publicly listed companies, Godrej, Apollo, etc., which has more than 6 women directors, right? So there is a case also to be made, well, look at the performance when you have a substantial number of women on the board. But I think more than anything else in this country is changing so dramatically. And it is young people who are making that change. And you cannot stop them. So this idea of having a pool of 200 people, this idea of having just a pool of a small number of families that control things, that is just changed. And the corporate world will also absorb that change.
So youth is the hope for Indian corporate governance in some form.
I think when the average Indian is 28 And you don't have many 28-year-olds here. So
That's
in
true.
many ways, we have to catch up with that.
That's true. So wonderful. Thank you so much for this set of opinions. And now I turn it back to them.
Thank you so much, sir. Again, give it up for our esteemed panelists that are with us over here. Many thanks for joining with us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's set the record straight because that is the name of our next session. Let's quickly get cracking on it. India, the world's largest democracy with a rich multicultural society that has long prided itself on the peaceful transfer of power. Now, it is one of the fastest growing economies and with a consequential global footprint, but despite significant economic growth, India's narrative often gets lost on the global stage. How do we reclaim that very narrative? And why does the global perspective diverge from India?